The morning sun, a molten gold disk, was just beginning its ascent, chasing away the cool mist that clung to the tall, amber grasses of the expansive meadows. The air, crisp and clean after a night's rain, carried the sharp, resinous scent of pine mingled with the subtle fragrance of blooming wildflowers. Caleb's existence was woven into this land, a tapestry of duty and profound belonging. His weathered face, though young, bore the quiet etchings of experience, a testament to countless hours under the vast American sky and the silent wisdom gained from observing the intricate dance of life and death that played out daily before him. Binoculars, well-worn and familiar, were a constant companion, slung around his neck, his eyes, sharp and observant, ceaselessly scanning the horizon. Caleb's dedication was more than just a job. It was a legacy. He had grown up in a small town nestled on the park's border, his childhood memories painted with the vibrant hues of the wilderness and shadowed by the harsh realities of its struggle. Poachers, driven by greed, had long been a scourge upon this natural sanctuary, their ruthless actions tearing at the fabric of the ecosystem. The deepest scar on Caleb's heart was the loss of his father, one of the park's first and most respected rangers, who had fallen victim to a poacher's rifle during a winter patrol. Caleb was just a boy then, barely 12, but the searing pain of that loss had solidified into an unshakable resolve. He had sworn that day, with a solemnity far beyond his years, to continue his father's work, to stand as a guardian against those who sought to plunder the park's treasures. His mother, her eyes filled with a mother's fear, had pleaded with him to choose a safer path. Her words, "This land took your father, Caleb. Must it take you too?" echoing in his memory. But the call of the wild, the intrinsic need to protect it, flowed through his veins as surely as his own blood. He couldn't turn away. Each patrol began with a meticulous ritual. Caleb would check his gear, water, medical supplies, tracking equipment, and the tranquilizer rifle, a tool of last resort. His movements were unhurried, precise, honed by years of navigating the unpredictable terrain. His partner, Elijah, an older, seasoned ranger whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles and whose eyes held to calm the thousand sunsets over the Absarika Range, had initially found Caleb's fastidious preparations a source of amusement. But after several perilous encounters where Caleb's foresight had been the thin line between safety and disaster, Elijah's teasing had given way to a quiet respect. Elijah, with his encyclopedic knowledge of Yellowstone's secrets and his own stories of survival, often served as a grounding presence for Caleb, a mentor who understood the profound weight of their shared responsibility. On one such morning, as the wilderness awakened around them in a symphony of chirping mountain bluebirds, distant bugles of elk from a nearby river valley, and the rustle of aspen leaves in the gentle breeze, Caleb's keen senses picked up something amiss. He was driving his old, battered pickup truck, leaving a trail of pale dust in its wake, when he spotted it. Dark, crimson drops starkly contrasting against the muted green of the summer grass. They were too bright, too fresh to be mistaken for anything but what they were: blood. His pulse quickened. This wasn't the sign of a natural kill. This hinted at suffering, at a desperate struggle. His hand instinctively went to his radio, but an almost tangible feeling, a premonition perhaps, stopped him. Backup would take time, precious time that a wounded animal might not have. Turning off the engine, Caleb silently disembarked, his tranquilizer rifle ready, though he hoped not to use it. Every nerve was on high alert. He followed the blood trail, each step a careful placement on the uneven ground. The tension inside him coiled tighter with every yard. His sharpened hearing strained to catch the slightest sound. A snapped twig could mean a poacher's trap, a low growl, a wounded predator cornered and dangerous. He heard neither, and the silence itself was unnerving. Rounding a dense thicket of wild roses and serviceberry bushes, Caleb froze, his breath catching in his throat. Before him lay a creature of immense power and tragic beauty, a massive male cougar, its majestic tawny coat, usually a symbol of its stealth and dominance, matted with dried blood. Its powerful body was horribly entangled in a cruel embrace of steel wire, the kind poachers use for their deadly snares. The wire, clearly meant for a deer or an elk, had instead ensnared this apex predator, cutting deep into its flesh, leaving raw, bleeding wounds that spoke of a prolonged and agonizing struggle. The cougar lifted its heavy head, and its amber eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion, met Caleb's. There was no immediate rage in that gaze, no overt threat, only a profound weariness and a flicker of something Caleb couldn't quite decipher. A low sound, more a pained hiss than a growl, rumbled from its chest. It was clear the cougar had been trapped for hours, its strength waning with each futile attempt to break free. Caleb slowly, deliberately unslung his backpack, never breaking eye contact. The slightest misstep, a sudden movement could cost him his life. But the thought of leaving the magnificent animal to such a cruel fate was unbearable. His instincts, honed by years in the wild, screamed of danger. A wounded predator was unpredictable, a cornered one lethal. Yet, something deeper, a current of empathy that transcended fear, told him this cougar understood. It seemed to sense that Caleb was not a threat, but a potential, albeit unlikely, source of help. "Hang in there, big fellow," Caleb whispered, his voice low and soothing as he carefully retrieved a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters from his toolkit. "I'm here to help. Just stay calm, and we'll both get through this." Inch by agonizing inch, Caleb began the painstaking process of freeing the cougar. The taut wires resisted, their sharp edges now digging into his own fingers, drawing blood, but he didn't falter. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging, mixing with the dust that coated his skin. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity, each snip of the cutters a small victory against the brutal trap. He braced himself for an attack with every movement, adrenaline a constant, thrumming current in his veins. The cougar flinched, its massive body trembling with pain as a piece of wire tore away from a wound, but it made no move to retaliate. Its eyes remained fixed on Caleb's hands, watching his every action with a cautious, almost unnerving attention. Finally, with a last, decisive cut, the final loop of wire fell away. Caleb sagged, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Carefully, he reached into his backpack for antiseptic and clean bandages, his movements slow and deliberate. He began to treat the deepest of the cougar's wounds. The animal shuddered at the sting of the disinfectant, its muscles tensing, but still, it did not attack. Its breathing was heavy, ragged, but in its gaze, Caleb thought he saw something new, a softening, a flicker that might have been relief, or perhaps, impossibly, gratitude. He dismissed the thought as absurd, an anthropomorphic fancy. And yet, in that moment, as he tended to the great cat, something profound passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a fragile bridge built across the chasm that separated man and wild. "I'll call you Regal," Caleb murmured, the name coming to him unbidden, fitting for such a majestic creature. "Because you're going to see many more sunrises, my friend." Caleb slowly backed away, giving Regal space, allowing the cougar to decide its next move. To his astonishment, Regal rose on shaky legs, took a few uncertain, stiff steps, then stopped. It turned its massive head and looked back at Caleb, a long, lingering gaze over its shoulder, a look that burned itself into Caleb's memory forever. It was as if the predator, the king of Yellowstone's hidden corners, wanted to remember the face of its rescuer. Then, the majestic animal, still limping, disappeared into the concealing embrace of the tall pines and dense undergrowth. Back at the ranger station, when Caleb recounted the incredible encounter, he was met mostly with disbelieving smiles and skeptical laughter from his colleagues. "A cougar wouldn't just lie there while you cut him free," Caleb, one of the older rangers, scoffed. "He would have torn you to pieces." Only Elijah, his wise old partner, remained silent, watching Caleb with a thoughtful, knowing expression. Weeks turned into months. Life in Yellowstone returned to its familiar rhythm of patrols, tracking poachers, and tending to the everyday dramas of the wild. But Caleb often found himself scanning the forests and ridges, his eyes searching for a flash of tawny fur, a familiar silhouette. And then, one day, he saw it, the unmistakable form of a large cougar with a powerful build, following his pickup truck from a respectful distance. At first, Caleb thought it was his imagination, a trick of the light or a wishful thought. But the appearances became more frequent, more deliberate. Regal, it seemed, had not forgotten. His colleagues, initially incredulous, soon witnessed the strange phenomenon for themselves. Regal never approached too closely when others were around, always maintaining a dignified distance, a tawny shadow on the edge of the tree line. But he was there, a silent sentinel. One day, while Caleb was stopped by a riverbank, he watched in stunned amazement as Regal, materializing as if from the very air, chased off a pack of opportunistic coyotes that had begun to circle his unattended vehicle, before retreating just as quickly into the woods. Another time, while Caleb was tracking a dangerous group of poachers, deep in unfamiliar territory near the park's northern range, Regal suddenly stepped onto the dusty track ahead of him, blocking his path with a series of low, urgent growls. Confused but trusting the cougar's uncharacteristic behavior, Caleb turned back. Later that evening, he learned that the poachers had set a deadly ambush exactly where he had been headed. Regal had saved his life. The station chief, a veteran ranger with 3 decades of experience etched into his stern face, shook his head when he heard the latest tale. "You're a fortunate man, Caleb, or perhaps a bewitched one," he'd said, though a hint of wonder softened his gruff voice. "That's a wild animal, not a house cat. Keep your rifle close." But Caleb knew better. He had seen what others hadn't. He understood the depth of the bond that had been forged that day by the poacher's snare. He saw how Regal, despite his wild nature, stayed at the edge of visibility, never coming too close to the human encampments, yet never fully disappearing when Caleb was alone on patrol. The deep wounds from the poacher's wire had eventually healed, leaving only faint scars on Regal's tawny fur, silent symbols of the extraordinary friendship that had blossomed in the heart of the wild. They were permanent reminders of the moment that had irrevocably changed the fates of both man and beast. The fire season that year was particularly harsh, bringing with it new and desperate challenges. The relentless sun baked the earth, and streams dwindled, forcing animals into closer, often tense, proximity. Territorial conflicts flared with increased ferocity, and poachers, ever opportunistic, grew bolder, taking advantage of the animals congregating near the few remaining water sources. During this difficult period, in the western sector of the park, a large herd of bison, driven to desperation by thirst and agitated by human presence near their depleted grazing lands, became an increasingly volatile threat to the tourist trails and campgrounds scattered in the area. Several campsites had already been disturbed, their equipment scattered by the massive, agitated animals. Though no human casualties had yet occurred, the situation was escalating dangerously with each passing day. One sweltering afternoon, a frantic distress call crackled over Caleb's radio. A group of photographers from a renowned nature publication had found their SUV mired in the loose scree of a steep mountainside trail, directly in the path of a stampeding, enraged bison herd. Without a second's hesitation, Caleb gunned his engine, his old truck bouncing over the rugged terrain as he raced towards their location. Coordinating the evacuation efforts with other rangers over the radio, Caleb knew he had to buy time. He maneuvered his vehicle, flashing his headlights and blaring his horn, trying to draw the bison's attention, to divert their thundering charge away from the stranded photographers. The risky maneuver worked, but at a tremendous cost. In the ensuing chaos, Caleb found himself cut off from the main group of rangers, his own vehicle now careening into a narrow, rocky canyon. He had hoped the tight passage would be too restrictive for the colossal bison to follow. He miscalculated. With a sickening lurch, his truck became inextricably wedged between 2 massive boulders, the engine stalling with a final, ominous cough. The ground beneath him began to tremble. He was trapped, Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to engulf him. A dead end lay ahead, and behind him, the enraged bison, their guttural bellows echoing off the canyon walls, were closing in. He fumbled for his flare gun, knowing it would offer little more than a momentary, futile delay. The massive, shaggy figure of the herd's leader, an enormous bull with dangerously sharp horns, loomed at the canyon's entrance, its sheer size filling the narrow space, its eyes burning with a terrifying, primal fury. The air filled with the acrid scent of dust and the raw, pungent odor of animal fear. The bison raised its head, letting out a deafening, earth-shattering snort that seemed to make the very canyon walls shake. And then, from out of nowhere, a tawny blur shot into view. Regal. He appeared like a phantom, a streak of golden lightning, leaping with astonishing agility onto a rock ledge just above the enraged bison leader. Before the colossal bull could react, Regal launched himself downwards, landing with a thud directly between Caleb and the charging giant. His roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and defiance, ripped through the air, a thunderclap that momentarily stunned even the rampaging bison. Caleb had never witnessed such a spectacle. A lone cougar, confronting a creature that outweighed it by many tons, a battle that seemed utterly hopeless. But Regal was not attacking to kill. That would have been suicide. Instead, he began a desperate, dangerous dance, a series of feints, snarls, and lunges, drawing the lead bison's furious attention solely upon himself. He dodged the swinging, murderous horns with reflexes that were almost too fast for the eye to follow, his body a fluid expression of courage and agility, always positioning himself as a shield between Caleb and the immediate danger. It was a deadly ballet, a display of incredible skill and even greater bravery. Caleb, seizing the precious seconds Regal's intervention had bought him, scrambled out of the wedge truck. He clawed his way up the steep, rocky side of the canyon, stones crumbling beneath his hands and feet, their sharp edges cutting into his palms. Adrenaline coursed through him, obliterating the pain. Glancing back, he saw the rest of the bison herd beginning to pour into the narrow canyon, while Regal continued his desperate, one cougar stand against their enraged leader. Then, at one fateful, heart-stopping moment, the bison's powerful head toss connected. Its horn struck Regal with brutal force, sending the cougar tumbling several yards, his body crashing hard against the unyielding rocks. Regal fell, a crumpled heap of tawny fur and dust. But almost instantly, with a courage that defied belief, he was back on his feet, shaking his great head, refusing to admit defeat, his defiant roar echoing once more. Caleb, now in a relatively safe position on the higher ledge, watched the uneven battle unfold in horrified awe. He was helpless, his hands raw and bleeding, his knees weak from exertion, but his heart ached with a mixture of terror and an overwhelming surge of gratitude for the wild creature that had so selflessly risked its life for him. Nature, in its infinite complexity, sometimes delivers lessons in the most unexpected and profound ways. After several more long, tense minutes of confrontation, the exhausted bison leader, perhaps sensing the futility of its rage against such a tenacious and perplexing adversary, or perhaps its primal instinct to rejoin the herd reasserting itself, seemed to lose interest in the strange cougar that neither fled nor truly pressed an attack. With a final, lingering glare at Regal, the bull turned, leading its herd away, thundering out of the canyon and deeper into the wilderness in search of less troublesome paths. Regal collapsed onto the dusty ground, his powerful body heaving with exhaustion. His side, where the bison's horn had glanced, was a mess of fresh wounds and bruises, starkly visible against his tawny coat. Still in shock from what he had just witnessed, Caleb cautiously made his way down from the ledge. He couldn't believe it. A wild predator had just saved him, had chosen to protect him. His own hands were covered in blood from the cuts he'd sustained during his climb. His knees still trembled, but he had to approach his rescuer, his friend. He moved slowly, carefully expecting Regal, now undoubtedly in immense pain, to recoil or lash out. Wild animals, especially injured ones, rarely tolerated closeness, rarely showed vulnerability. But Regal only turned his head, his amber eyes, no longer clouded with pain, but filled with a weary understanding, meeting Caleb's. In that moment, Caleb did something he had never dared to do before with such a formidable creature in such a state. He knelt beside the wild predator and, for the first time since the rescue from the snare, reached out a trembling hand and gently touched the thick, coarse fur of Regal's powerful shoulder. "You saved me, Regal," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion, feeling the cougar's powerful heart beating steadily beneath his palm. Fast from exertion and pain, but undeniably strong. "Now we're even, my brother." When the other rangers finally found them hours later, the scene that greeted them was one they would speak of for years to come. Caleb was sitting quietly against a rock, and beside him, resting peacefully, lay the massive form of Regal, the legendary cougar, allowing the man he had saved to gently tend to his new wounds. No one dared to approach too closely, awed into silence by the palpable bond between them. There was no need for fear. Caleb simply stood and walked toward his colleagues, and Regal, after a moment, watched him go, making no move to follow this time, his duty done. The news of the cougar that had saved a ranger, the guardian of Yellowstone, spread like wildfire throughout the park and into the gateway towns beyond. Skeptics dismissed it as an embellished tale, a coincidental alignment of animal behaviors. Romantics and local elders spoke of it in hushed tones, calling it an act of profound gratitude, a blessing from the ancient spirits of the land. Researchers, drawn by the extraordinary accounts, hope to study this unique case of interspecies connection to understand the depths of the bond between Caleb and Regal. Tourists, captivated by the legend, booked tours specifically hoping to catch a glimpse of the famed guardian cougar and his human friend. But Caleb knew their bond wasn't for public spectacle or scientific dissection. It was a private, sacred pact, forged in moments of shared peril and mutual respect. After the Bison incident, Regal became even more cautious, appearing less frequently in open spaces, his wild instincts perhaps reasserting a degree of distance. Yet, as Caleb continued his patrols across the endless, sun-kissed valleys and shadowed forests of Yellowstone, he would often spot a familiar tawny silhouette on a distant ridge or a flicker of movement in the deep shadows of an ancient pine. Sometimes, Regal would follow his pickup truck for miles, a silent escort through the vast wilderness. Other times, he would simply watch from afar, a reassuring presence, as if to confirm that the man who had once saved him, and whom he had, in turn, saved, was safe. The faint scars on Regal's tawny fur, and the newer ones from the bison's horn, became silent symbols of their extraordinary friendship, permanent reminders of the moments that had forever intertwined the destinies of man and beast. In times of danger, when poachers threatened or sudden blizzards swept through the park, Regal would often appear as if by instinct. He had once guided a group of lost hikers, disoriented and frightened, back to a main trail where rangers found them, safe and sound. Another time, his deep, warning growl had alerted Caleb to a hidden patch of unstable ground near a ravine, undoubtedly saving him from serious injury or worse. Old Elijah, the wise ranger who had believed Caleb's story from the very start, would often nod sagely and say, "Sometimes, Caleb, the spirits of the land take the form of animals to protect those who guard it with a true heart." Caleb didn't know if he believed in spirits, but he couldn't deny the profound, almost mystical understanding that existed between him and the wild predator. It was a connection that transcended ordinary explanation, a bond that went beyond the boundaries of species. And every evening, as he returned to the station, Caleb would often stop his truck on a rise, overlooking the vast wilderness, the landscape bathed in the soft, ethereal hues of the setting sun. And almost always, at the shifting border between light and shadow, his silent guardian, Regal, would appear. A quiet acknowledgement, a shared moment of peace, a reminder that even the wildest of hearts, there could be a place for loyalty, for gratitude, and for a friendship that defied all expectations. It was an unspoken promise between man and cougar, a testament to a power capable of changing not just their lives, but perhaps, in its own small way, the very heart of Yellowstone itself.